Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Tell Me I'm Wrong. Today it is just me, Olivia. Kayla actually is out of commission right now. She's not going to be here today. She obviously is like a huge part of this podcast. It's hard for me to think about doing this podcast without her even for a week. But yeah, unfortunately, life happened and Kayla got bamboozled by Lawrence Fish and Shrimp. So do not get Lawrence Fish and Shrimp. But regardless, for today's podcast, it's kind of fitting that the podcast that I'm doing by myself without my dear, dear friend Kayla is on love, but more specifically when it comes to morality. So today we're going to dive in on Iris Murdoch, who is a novelist and philosopher, her views on, like I said, love when it comes to morality. Most of us grow up learning that morality is about what people do, right? We're told to be kind, tell the truth, don't steal the cookies from the cookie jar, essentially. And I think there's a common phrase that we all have probably heard, action over intention. It's the kind of thing adults say when a kid protests, well, I didn't mean to hurt their feelings. It doesn't matter. It's clean, it's simple, and it teaches kids about accountability. It doesn't matter what your intentions were because at the end of the day, your actions affect people and you don't have control over that. The only thing you have control over is your actions. It doesn't matter how good your intentions were. So what does this say about how we generally view morality? It says that what matters morally is the outcome of behavior rather than what someone was thinking or feeling internally. At the same time, it's like, okay, we're told that it doesn't matter. It just still somehow feels wrong to excuse what's happening internally because it feels as if some of the most important and moving moral work happens in places that no one can see. She believes that being good is less about a dramatic moral choice and more about learning how to see the world with a kind of careful, honest attention. We'll focus on how, for Murdoch, this kind of attention is tied deeply and directly to love. Let's get started. Like any good philosophical writing, Murdoch starts with a picture of morality that she disagrees with. So she argues that modern philosophy often presents a narrow picture of what a human being is, and people are understood, she says, as choosers and performers of external actions. And morality, on this view, is about what you decide what you do. She says, mental concepts must be analyzed genetically, and so the inner must be thought of as parasitic upon the outer. She's specifically critiquing schools of thought like existentialism, which emphasize autonomous choice and responsibility, or utilitarianism, which we all know well, which measures morality by outcomes and usefulness, remember, what maximizes pleasure and minimalizes pain. But these approaches, Murdoch thinks, it disregards things like intention, belief, love, virtue, or sincerity. Though it's said that these are analyzable genetically, that means that they're explained in terms of how they arise or how they function, which is usually in connection with an outward behavior. But these feelings, intention, belief, love, that doesn't seem to be just solely an outward expression. On this view, the inner does not have an independent standing. It's not something substantial in its own right, but instead it's treated as a derivative. If we did see something like intention, belief, or love, without this kind of dualistic approach, Murdoch would say that the picture is deeply incomplete. Moreover, she would say that it leaves out the richness of inner life and flattens human beings into a sort of decision-making machine. It's essentially eliminating humans of their, let's say, nuanced and complex internal and emotional senses. So I kind of already started hinting at what Murdoch proposes as a counter solution or a more reasonable solution. So she says that morality is fundamentally not about what you do, but about how you see things. She says the central concept of morality is the individual, thought of as knowable by love. She would say that, like, the role of love has been theorized away in philosophy. We like to try to use empirical or theoretical arguments. But Murdoch, she's trying to say we can't always explain things by outcomes and behaviors. Sometimes there's these, like, extreme, strong feelings that motivate us to do the change. Action over intention, we can change that to intention affects action, which is ideal for her. So specifically when it comes to moral ethics, it typically appears straightforward when we identify the form of a right action. Practically, in moral life, it's much more, like, complicated because virtues are embodied, right, in unique individuals within their histories and their circumstances and their viewpoints, their experiences. And she says we get there through love. So instead of using abstract moral principles, we have to use love to try to see into another person's reality in order to see the person as they truly are, which to her is getting at a person and acting in a way that is moral. So Murdoch goes on to further, separate her view of morality versus a typical moral ethics approach, like utilitarianism, with a shop example. So I'm going to map that out for you guys. Murdoch argues the dominant view of morality often depicts morality as analogous to visiting a store. Like I said, in a code of ethics like utilitarianism, you examine the available goods, you use rational judgment to evaluate them, and then you make a decision based off of what seems most beneficial. The better your objectivity and discrimination, the more options you can choose from. So in this view, moral life is like shopping, a public, visible activity centered on selection and action. But why is this wrong for Murdoch? This sort of approach treats morality as if it were mainly about selecting the right action from available options, right? So she's saying, essentially, it's like, I want a pair of shoes, I need a new pair of running shoes, there's only 5 options, I don't really like any of them, I know how my feet are, I know what shoes I like when I ran, don't run anymore, but let's say I want to get back into it. I go to a store, there's only 5 options, I don't like any of them, I'm going to have to choose the lesser of 5 evils. And for Murdoch, that's not what morality should be about. She thinks that this misses the most important part of what moral life is. The long, quiet process of learning and seeing others more truthfully, wanting to see someone for who they are, not just, being satisfied by the idea we have of them. Because, very often I think we are satisfied with the ideal of a person. There's so many instances I could think of where I've had an attraction to someone where I just haven't done anything about it because I'd rather live the fantasy in my head because I just feel that it's better than reality. And that's not what morality is about. For her, it's not primarily a series of isolated decisions, but instead an ongoing discipline of attention. And when we're actually moved to do this, we're actually willing to do this for a person, that's when we can try, at least hopefully, to reach some sort of moral action. So now I want to connect 2 ideas, the idea of the individual and the idea of perfection. You're like, the idea of perfection, what? This is a whole new idea, but just bear with me. Murdoch gives an example with 2 characters, M and D. So imagine a mother who privately dislikes her daughter-in-law. I don't think this is necessarily hard to imagine. It happens all the time. And though the mom may even behave perfectly polite to the daughter-in-law every time she sees her, nothing outward ever changes, she may one day wake up and decide, wow, the way I've been viewing D is so abstract to what she actually is. I basically pushed my judgment onto her actions with my own intentions instead of even trying to see what the intentions behind her actions were. And let's say she's like, crap, this is terrible. why am I doing this? Like, I want my son to be happy, and he clearly loves her. So I need to try to start seeing what he loves about her. So this sort of dialogue and like internal confliction happens just where I said it, internally. I mean, that sounded so bad, but it's true. Like, I don't know how else to say it. It happens internally. And so the question then becomes, can something morally important happen if like no sort of physical behavior changes? It's just a sort of perception change, or even like a willingness to approach something with an open mind. That's kind of how you can see it in its most like basic sense. So now if we see the mother take this sort of step back and try to see her daughter-in-law as her daughter-in-law truly is, over time, the mother would reflect on her own prejudice and jealousy, or whatever her weird projection feelings are. And she deliberately tries to see the girl more fairly. She tries to see the girl, like I said, for who she truly is. And over time, the mother's perception changes, and she begins to see the daughter-in-law's good qualities. Like I said, nothing physically has changed. There's no sort of outward behavior that can be like grabbed or pointed at and said, this is what incited this sort of like change. But regardless, a change happens, right? And this transformation happens entirely in someone's mind. It's an inner shift. And for Murdoch, this is what is so morally important, that sort of inner shift. Murdoch is saying you can live your whole life outwardly decent, and you can still be morally lazy if your inner vision is distorted. And conversely, you can perform a profound moral act without changing a single outward behavior. I can still be a terrible, terrible, terrible person to everyone else. Not actually, but I can judge people, right? Like we all judge people. I mean, I do. I like, we all like to act like we don't, but we do. It's just human nature. When we first see someone, doesn't even mean we take those judgments as the Bible, but regardless, we still have first judgments and internal judgments that we project onto people. And you can still do that in most of your life, but Murdoch's saying you can just have one person, and ideally you do it to everyone, but let's just say it starts, right, with one person, either a friend, someone you love romantically, whatever, your son's wife, like, it doesn't matter. You can still project onto everyone else, but if you can at least intentionally try to make this shift and gradually over time make a shift in perception by seeing someone as they truly are, this, for Murdoch, is morally ethical, or it is acting morally. At least this once. But where does love come in? Love's the motivation here. Without love, none of this would ever happen. Love's what motivates us to want to have this sort of internal change. Murdoch's not saying something like, the more Dee was around M, she grew a fondness of Dee and eventually grew to love her personality. Like, that's not the point. It's not like a sort of acclamation, but it's like the love was the process. It's a part of the process. It's the thing that kind of kickstarts the process. It's not the result. So love can be seen in M's disciplined effort to see another person clearly. So love here means that Dee admits she was wrong. She admits that she had her own projections and her own insecurities, and she starts to question her own motives. She pays careful attention to her own projections and Dee as she truly is, the person they are, the person that Dee presents herself as, without all of these weird ideas and projections and insecurities that M projects onto Dee. So to further emphasize this, to just, take it home completely. I'm on third base, baby. I'm about to run. I'm going to do it. I'm stealing a base and I'm going for the gold, taking the hit. This is from The Idea of Perfection. But she says, love is knowledge of the individual. M confronted Dee has an endless task. Moral tasks are characteristically endless, not because of within, blah, blah, blah. As we look at concepts themselves, they're changing. So, love is an attempt to see an individual as they truly are, right? Without an imposition of our own biases. And though it may not be possible to truly see someone in their own light without like projecting our own sort of biases or like concerns or feelings, we can still try. And the reason we try is through love, right? So love is the endless process of learning and evolving that demands both inward and outward attention to coming to know an individual as they truly are. And this sort of endless process is what makes love an active force. It's inexhaustible. You'll never get to know someone you'll never know, right? I'm never going to know what Kayla's thinking at every second of every day. And she's not going to know what I'm thinking of every second of every day. Thank God. But, we still try. We try to understand each other and we try to like get to know each other when we can. But regardless, we'll see, I guess. Like, all we can do is try with like good intentions in our heart and actually try to see each other for who we truly are and understand each other for what we say and when we express how we feel and how we like interact with each other. And that's, what it's got to be. But alas, it's never ending. It's freaking exhausting. Sometimes, friends, relationships, family, whatever. Sometimes things are miscommunicated. Sometimes I say something and I'm not trying to hurt someone's feelings and I do. I'm just trying to crack a joke. But not everyone is as much of a comedian as I. But some of us are more sensitive, which is fine. My, reoccurring acknowledgement of that idea, Murdoch would say it is moral because I'm doing this. I'm addressing this willingly because I want to be better. I don't want to hurt my friends' feelings. I don't want to hurt my parents' feelings or my sister's feelings or my partner's feelings. And so even though I might think it's funny, it's through this endless and tedious process of love that I realized, maybe I should keep my mouth shut sometimes. Because even though it's funny to me, it doesn't mean it's funny to everyone. And this is where Murdoch's ideal of perfection comes in. We can never arrive at a perfect understanding of another person. We can't solve them. We can't be like, aha, I figured you out for who you truly are. I know what you're thinking and feeling, and I can kind of gauge that at every second of every day. We can come pretty close. Obviously you can get to know someone in such a great way and in such an extreme, familiarity that you do know what things make them tick, what things make them laugh, what hurts their feelings, what's going to set them on edge so you can better rage bait them like myself. But regardless, you're never actually going to know them for their whole entirety of their personhood. And the idea of perfection, Murdoch would say, is playing a central role because it's giving moral life a decision, right? It's giving us a decision to try to make a change without claiming that humans can ever become morally flawless. It's again giving you, basically, she's saying kudos to you for trying. You're not going to be able to see someone for who they truly are, but you're trying and you're doing everything you can and you're coming to understand someone better because you are trying intentionally to do this, and you get points for that. This sort of ongoing, this sort of task, it guides it to a sort of ongoing moral development. And every time we notice our jealousy or correct a prejudice, admit we're wrong, admit we may have been a little bit insensitive, we move slightly closer to the good. We move slightly closer to this idea of perfection that we are motivated to by love. And we're never going to arrive there. But that's okay, because the striving for it itself is meaningful. So to further build on this idea, we are going to turn to another paper that Iris Murdoch has written. It's called The Sublime and the Good. And no, we're not talking Santeria. Kayla's going to cut that out. I know she is. In The Sublime and the Good, Murdoch explores the nature of art and its relationship to moral and aesthetic judgments. So she does so, particularly in response to King Tolstoy, but his views. So Tolstoy would say, or basically his view is that great art is universally understandable and accessible to all because it expresses like a shared religious or like moral sentiment. We're all moved by this piece of art because we can all relate to it. And Murdoch's saying, she's going to say, no, bro, you're wrong. Greatness in art isn't about like a sort of clarity or like universal definitive moral message, but rather it's about the depth of individual perception, and that like individual perception transcends straightforward moral or religious shared understanding. So it's like I'm going beyond what is universal. I'm going beyond religious beliefs, blah, blah, blah. And I'm trying to see something for as it truly is. It doesn't matter if I believe this, if I feel this, if I think this. I'm trying to see something for what it truly is. And maybe that's not universal. That's fine. But I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to appreciate this for what it is. And that, for Murdoch, is what great art is. So she would say that great art often focuses on specific individuals and their inner lives, right? Their particular circumstances, their like complex and nuanced nature, rather than like trying to present a relatable or universal moral message that's easily understood and applied to everyone in the exact same way. So she brings up Shakespeare actually a lot to support this. She says that Shakespeare does not flatten his characters into a sort of moral lesson, right? So he really tries to portray his characters, each with a sort of emotional and psychological depth, not death. Take Hamlet, take Ophelia, take frickin' Juliet. Like, they're all more than just moral lessons, right? Like, they all have their own complex feelings and journeys and conflictions. And this is love at work for Murdoch. This sort of like attention to the complexity of persons is a sort of loving one. A refusal to reduce them to a sort of moral propaganda. And it's a commitment to reality over relatability or simplification. And so, with that being said, Murdoch would reject a strict separation between aesthetic and moral judgment, right? She would rather argue that art and morality are and should be connected, and they're because they both fundamentally involve love. Love is the key to understanding both the moral and artistic. It involves perceiving and appreciating another's unique individuality. We can only appreciate or even try to appreciate it and understand it if we're moved to that by love. In a lot of Murdoch's work, I would say love does a huge amount of philosophical work, which is why I think I like her so much, because I also use love and specifically vulnerability to do a huge amount of my philosophical work and just like work in general. And the sublime and the good, for Murdoch, love is not just sentimental, right? It's structural. We know that love makes us capable of seeing a person not as a sort of moral symbol or a type or a lesson, you know, some sort of thing we're supposed to learn and like just leave the interaction or relationship and that person for a sort of like parable, essentially, but rather as a real, distinct consciousness. And we can only do this through love. Without love, art becomes propaganda and morality becomes a sort of rule following. But with love, both acts become something of a sort of truthful attention. So I've talked a lot about love's function in moral philosophy, right? But now it's time to, put that to life, to put that to action, put that to the test. What does it really look like to love someone? In Against Dryness, another paper by Murdoch, Murdoch begins to worry about what she calls a kind of dryness in modern thought. Murdoch argues that modern literature and philosophy are often too strongly influenced by scientific rationalism, and like certain philosophical traditions have become too dry. They've become too simple, too neat, too focused on clear messages or like logical answers. tidy explanations, and in reality, we're not like that. And Murdoch says we need to take stock in this. People are morally and psychologically complex beings, right? And for Murdoch, the person, like, we're not simply a free individual because of these sort of, like, moral and psychological complexities, but rather our reality is characterized by our relations, our imperfections, and our ongoing development to hopefully changing that. And so she argues that literature and philosophy need to become richer and more attentive, basically. We need to start drawing on people's emotions. We need to start motivating, like making people feel the love. Be motivated to see people for who they truly are. We need to get better, essentially, at describing the depths and messiness of real lives. And that's what a good piece of literature does. This sort of attention is the foundation of moral life. So to love someone, then, would be to recognize someone as fully human, and we're not projecting any sort of our own needs or desires onto the person. And this is impossible, right? I said this already, but we can't ever reach a point where we're not projecting a sort of like feeling or insecurity or fear. But we can try, and there's something in the fact that we're really willing to try. Because we're motivated by love to try, and we are willing to try, that is a sort of moral achievement. If we view people through our own desires or assumptions, we're less likely to act with fairness or understanding even. But on the other side, if we try to see someone for who they truly are, we're at least attempting to recognize their individual history and inner life. And therefore, we're going to be more likely to respond with care and respect. So love, then, to Murdoch, is understood in this way. It becomes a sort of training ground for moral vision. Love becomes the thing that motivates all. It's the driving force. And honestly, I think that's really beautiful. I think that's touching, and I think that's true. I actually agree with Murdoch here. That's what I'm trying to say. And I don't usually agree with philosophers 100%. And I think the reason why I agree with Murdoch is because, for me, the whole groundwork of my philosophical, inspiration is grounded in love. It's motivated by love, either in, like, how ethically something's being approached or just philosophy of love and sex in general. I don't think it's hard for you guys, after you've heard some of our podcasts, to see why I would be so moved by this, but I think there is something in that, right? Because without love, we would all be miserable. Without love given and received, at least to one other person, it would be a very sad life indeed. We all have people that we love, and we all have people that love us because we're all individual and unique and complex, and though we may not always see the love that we're given or even feel it, it's there. And I think that's really, really powerful and hopeful to remember that. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's podcast. I hope it wasn't too scrambled and yucca-mucca soup. I know you all miss Kayla. I miss Kayla deeply. It hasn't even been 8 hours, but we're friends. Like, we're just, like, that's what it comes down to. Like, when she's not here to do a podcast with me, I feel it. And I know she would say the same. And I find great comfort in that. And I hope you guys do too, because you have someone that feels the exact same way. Sorry, that was a really cheesy ending, but it's been an emotional week. It's midterms. Have a great rest of your day. Good luck, and goodbye.